Good morning. It is really good to see you all this morning. Appreciate everyone coming out on this rainy, wintry-like day. Probably the kids are hoping it does turn to snow tonight so they'll get out of school tomorrow, but we'll have to wait and see, won't we? Our memory verse this morning was taken from 2 Samuel, and so that's sort of the starting point of this morning's lesson. If we put it in some context here, 2 Samuel chapter 7, David is at a moment of reflection. Last Sunday, Jeffrey shared a message with us about how God looks upon the heart of man, not on the outside, and how David sort of distinguished himself amongst his brothers, really amongst all the suitable men who could be king at the time, and God saw something unique in him. And so David was a man who was after God's heart, pursuing God's heart. And so here David is. Saul's now dead. Jonathan's dead. David's king. He's living in a nice house. He's reflecting, wow, I've been blessed. God has been good to me. It appears to be a time of peace. There's no enemies to fight. And David's mind turns toward God. He says, more or less, God, I've got this really nice house, and your ark, the representation of your presence in this earth, the Ark of the Covenant, it's filled with things that were very important. The tablets of the law that Moses had. It has Aaron's rod. It's got the pieces of the manna that used to fall from the sky to feed us. He said it's just in a temporary, it got moved around a lot. It's just in a temporary location. I want to build a place for it. I want your presence to have equal importance as to how I'm blessed. I want to build a home for it, a temple. And God says, David, I can't let you do it. You've got a lot of things that sort of have accumulated on you. You're a man of war, not a man of peace. But I'm going to make you a promise, David. I'll make you a promise that your throne will be forever established. And not you, but your successor will build this house for me, this place for my ark to stay. And God makes this promise, this covenant with David. And then David makes that statement that served as our memory verse today. How great you are, O sovereign Lord. There is no one like you, and there's no God but you. I remember when the old red-back songbook, Sacred Selections for the Church. Remember it? Yeah. Remember what the song 1A was in the book? Oh, Lord my God, how great thou art. It was the old songbooks we all grew up singing from. How great thou art. But that's enough for us. We could have went there with a lesson, and actually thought about doing that. But I think the statement here that David makes is just so profound that we may need to spend some time with it this morning, is that there is no God but you. And David was fully aware that people worshipped a lot of other gods. I mean, that's what was going on around him, and later we'll discover that his own household's affected by that. But David makes this statement that there is no God but you, and so he has this insight that this shepherd turned king has an awareness of some truth that maybe we would benefit from in 2019 to reflect on. Maybe we can learn something about what David says here that maybe help us with how we direct and guide and shape our lives. Well, man tends to create gods in his image. Man tends to do that. Man likes to have things that look like him or act like him or behave like him or things he can manipulate. In fact, some of you who are reading the Bible through in the year and how it sort of broke down this year is sort of interesting. But you've been reading, some from the different parts of the Bible each day, something like that. But last week's reading it from the book of Isaiah. Isaiah spends almost this whole chapter talking about this problem that man has. And so Isaiah chapter 44 verse 13, he says, the craftsman stretches out his rule and he marks out one with chalk and he fashions it with a plane. He marks it out with a compass and he makes it like the figure of a man according to the beauty of a man that it remain in the house. He said, whatever the craftsman is, whether he's working with wood or with stone or whatever, he likes to make things that resemble him. He likes to do that. And he talks about how man will make these idols and these gods and these things up just to appease themselves. And they take it into their house. They make it part of their lives. But when we look at God, God created us in His very own image. Genesis chapter 1, 26 through 27. Then God said, let us make man in our image according to our likeness. Let him have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him, male and female. He created them. So God formed us to be like Him, to glorify Him, to have preeminence over His creation. But man's gods are not like that. We tend to pursue things that bring us pleasure or bring us happiness or benefit us in some way. But God created us not because He needed us, not because we benefit Him, because God really doesn't need anything from us. He's God, right? But God created us for a purpose. When man creates gods, they create these gods that in order for them to bless them, they have to sacrifice to them. They have to dedicate something to this person. Time, energy, treasure, whatever. They have to do something to appease this God or this deity, to make them happy or to fulfill their desire. And so in Isaiah again, 44, 7 through 19, he says, the rest of it He makes into a god, His carved image. He falls down before it and worships it, prays to it, says, deliver me, for You are my God. They do not understand. For He has shut their eyes so they cannot see, and their hearts so they cannot understand. And no one considers in his heart, nor is there knowledge nor understanding to say, I've burned half of it in the fire. Yes, I've indeed baked bread on its coals. I've roasted meat and eaten it, and I shall make the rest of it an abomination. Shall I fall down before a block of wood? Isaiah says, if we're not real careful, idolatry deceives us. We think it's something, but it's nothing. And he said, the irony of it is, he said, these people out here worshiping gods that they made themselves. He said, and we'll look in just a moment how they go down and collect things, and they make things, and they pay homage to these things. And he says that they're just not getting it. That the things that they're pursuing are not the things of God, they're the creation of man. Now, how God differs from man is that man creates things to only bless them. But what God does, He blesses us before we ever sacrifice to Him. Before we even acknowledge Him, God blesses us. That's what Paul understood in Romans. He said, while we were still yet sinners, Christ died for us. And this is demonstration of how God loves us. Before we even acknowledge God, before we even declared He is the only God, before we came to appreciation of His love toward us, He already sacrifices for us before we even do anything for Him. You see, the gods that we create in our mind and our thinking, we've got to sacrifice everything to them before they bless us. Before we get what we want out of it, we've got to give everything to it. And God says, no, no, no. I'm God. And I will bless you in spite of you even acknowledging me, even accepting me. Even before you're worthy, I will sacrifice for you. Man tends to make dead things into God. Isn't it interesting? We tend to do that. Isaiah, again, 44, 14 through 15. He cuts down cedars for himself and takes cypress and the oak. He secures it for himself among the trees of the forest. He plants a pine and the rain nourishes it. Then it should be for a man to burn, for he will make some of it and warm himself. Yes, he will kindle it and bakes bread. And then he makes a god and worship it. And he makes a carved image and falls down to it. The things that we make so important really don't matter. The things we create, the things we pursue. You know, a lot of people find a lot of joy in material things. I think that's something we all struggle with at times. But some people find a lot of joy in material things. That's where they spend their time, their energy. That's to show the world, maybe their success. I don't know. But, I've preached several funerals. I've seen several funeral processions. And one of the things I've yet to see is a U-Haul behind a hearse. Anyone seen one? You can't take it with you. I remember the preacher's analogy, the preacher's story about the man who gets to heaven with 2 suitcases. He's got a suitcase in each hand, And he gets to heaven, and St. Peter says, "What's up?" And he says, "Well, I'm here." And St. Peter says, "I see that. What'd you bring with you?" And the guy says, "Well, you don't understand. I worked really hard all my life and accumulated a lot of wealth, And so, I prayed to God that, I could transfer my wealth into something portable and I could bring it with me to heaven and enjoy it." And the man says, "You don't need anything here." And the guy says, I know. I don't need anything, but this would make me happier to have this with me in heaven." And St. Peter says, "Well, what's so important that you brought it all the way up here?" And so the man opens up a suitcase and it's filled with gold. And St. Peter looks at the gold-filled suitcase and says, "You brought pavement to heaven?" You see, that the things that we value in God's eyes are insignificant. And we tend to make these dead things, these things that they're seemingly important to us but are not the most important. But what God does, that He is the only God. He makes a man into a living being. In fact, the Apostle Paul had a somewhat unique experience, and he went to Athens. And in Athens, there was, all the idols and god and goddesses the Greek culture worshipped. And they had a hill up there, and it was a place where they put all these altars to all these different gods. And in fact, there were so many of them, they were still afraid they would forget one. So they even put an altar to the unknown God. They didn't want to offend any of the gods and goddesses. And Paul came to this, he says, "Man, y'all people are really religious. But I'm going to tell you about the unknown God, because He is the only God." And he said, He's the God of the living and the dead. And he says, and He's not worshipped with men's hands as though He needed anything, since He gives to all life, breath, and all things. And He's made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and the boundaries of their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord in hope that they might grope for Him and find Him, though He's never far from each one of. I don't know that we always see our fellow man that way. I think sometimes we look at our fellow man and see how far he is from God, or she is from God. Maybe how they're living, maybe how they're talking, maybe how they're dressing, maybe the things we're doing. We say, man, that person is so far away from God. But sometimes we forget, according to Paul, that God is not very far from each one of us, right? And Paul says that He's the God of everybody. He is the only God, and He don't need anything that we can make or do. He's not like these other things up here on this hill. He is unique in that He is the God of the living and the dead. I know some of you are probably sitting this morning saying, "Why is he talking about all these idols and stuff?" I mean, I don't know anyone who worships an idol. I don't know anyone's got something like that in their home, or, that's not too relevant to me. That's some of that Old Testament stuff. But I'm telling you, idolatry and making our own gods is not just a problem then, it's a problem now. We have a mission team that's going to Trinidad and Tobago this summer. We're excited. There's a lot of history there in Trinidad and Tobago. And I've been doing some study and appreciation of maybe some of the cultural things that we may be facing. But Hinduism is practiced in Trinidad and Tobago. You don't have to go to India to do that. And this is one of their shrines in Trinidad and Tobago. It's a god. And the Hindu people go there to worship their god. That's the reality. This is not Old Testament biblical thing. People still do this. They leave food at it. They leave money at it. Now, the priests come and collect that, and that's what they live off of. But that's how the system works. People still do this. People still act like people have always acted. They create things in order to receive what they perceive as blessings. And when I looked at it, I was a little shocked. There's over 36 Hindu shrines in this small island nation. And that's a very small percentage of the population. And we look at that and we think, how primitive, how ill-informed, how silly. But folks, we do it too. We make idols all the time. We make idols all the time. We make things that we put above God. We make things more important than God. We put things in place of God. We spend our time, energy, and talents pursuing those things instead of pursuing the things of God. And we're not real careful. These things consume us. Whether it's money or wealth, material things. It's somewhat interesting that for people who get trapped in the struggle with alcohol and drugs, that's the thing that they spend their whole time thinking and worshiping and dedicating themselves to. And the reality is the only thing we've ever known to work for alcoholics and drug addicts that's really worked is for them to know who God is and them to put their life and will into the hands of God and to develop through prayer, meditation, a relationship with God. It's the only thing we know that works. And we see popularity as some people's God. They'll do anything to be popular. They'll violate their own values. They'll violate the values of God to have a lot of people who like them. They'll put God on the back burner in order to have or pursue this. I mean, God made us beings that can have pleasure. Part of that is because God wants us to have the pleasure that He affords to us and gives to us. But God never wanted us to have pleasure as our primary pursuit in place of Him. I've jokingly sometimes said sometimes there's a fine line between a hobby and a vice. And it's a very thin line. Sometimes we can pursue something so much that it becomes a vice. It's no longer just a hobby. It takes us away from our priorities, our important things that we need to pursue. We see people's passion sometimes in following their sports team and their dedication. And they will brand everything that they own, their clothing, their car, everything they own, to the homage to their favorite sports team. But they wouldn't do the same for God. I remember several years ago, Tammy and I were guests to someone to go to a UT football game. I'm not picking on UT. Everybody's the same way. And it was good to go. Got to see it. You know, it was a novel experience for us and something like that. And then someone said, "What do you think?" I said, "I wish people were just that excited at church. I mean, if people got that worked up over Jesus, wouldn't that be awesome? That Jesus had that many fans? That people were invested, you know." I know it's got to be confusing to God because it's confusing to man. Things that we sometimes get so excited over and find so much meaning and so worth in. God says, be careful. Don't let that become your idol. If you put it before me, it could. You know, Paul even said, hey, exercise is a good thing, but it ain't the saving thing. I mean, we see people who have religious-like dedication to things that are dead. It is no less a form of idolatry than someone who went down and chopped down a tree and made something in his own image. And I think sometimes as parents, we have to be mindful of what we're teaching our kids. What's most important. It's a real challenge. It's a real challenge because the culture shifted. I remember the time and days where no one would schedule a practice on a Wednesday night. How many of you remember that? Well, the kids are in Bible study. There's a professional organization I belong to, you know, and they asked me to help restart the chapter here in the Upper Cumberland area. But they have their meetings, they have their teleconferences on Sunday afternoon. And I said, no, can't do it. Why not? I said, I don't do that kind of thing on Sunday. They have it like at 5 o'clock. And I said, no, it doesn't work for me. We surely could miss one Sunday. No, it doesn't work for me. But the culture shifted. And sometimes if we're not real careful, we buy I hate to use the language, but we drink the Kool-Aid of the culture. Then we give it to our kids. We lost the culture of Christianity somewhere along the way. And we're not real careful. We just go down that path without even thinking about it. And then what's the message that the next generation sees? What's most important? What comes first? So we do the same thing. I mean, we think we don't, but we do. And I've not read a lot of this guy's stuff, but some of the stuff I've read is really great. His name's Kyle Idleman. But this is a great quote of his. Whatever you're searching for and chasing after reveals that God is winning the war in your heart. Whatever you're searching for and chasing after reveals that God is winning the war in your heart. And that's what it is. That's what it is. Isaiah 44 verse 8. Thus says the Lord, the King of Israel and His Redeemer, the Lord of hosts. I am the first and the last. Beside me there is no God. What God says. There ain't nothing else. I don't know what you're kidding. Pursuit of happiness. It's not a God. It's dead. So, David, how great you are, O sovereign Lord. There's none like you, and there's no God but you. Revelation 21, 6 through 7 speaks to our problems. And he said to me, it is done. I'm the Alpha and Omega. That sounds a whole lot like what we just read in Isaiah. I'm the first and the last, right? The beginning and the end. I will give of the fountain of the water of life freely to him who thirsts. He who overcomes shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. But the cowardly, unbelieving, abominable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is second death. All these things that we pursue in life can be the separating factor for the very end. You see, I've talked this whole lesson and not mentioned something very important. Satan is behind idolatry. That's what he promised Eve in the garden. Oh, eat the fruit and you'll be as gods. Satan's biggest fear is for you to become what God created you to be. Made in his own image. Living a life that brings him glory. Not because he needs your glory, but because he wants to bless you. And this is why he's tried everything to make you lose focus. Brother Jeffrey taught from Colossians the other night, Wednesday night, and talked about this asceticism. The ascetics believe that you give up all the earthly pleasures in order to find God. They went to extremes. But they were right in the fact that if you focus in on God and sort of not focus on everything, it may be easier for you to find. And what Satan does, he just sows in all kinds of stuff. It comes out of every pitch you can think of. Overhands, underhand, curveball, speedball, spitball, whatever you can think of. He's throwing them all at us. And one of us will swing at. We all have something we're vulnerable to. And that's what Satan tries to do, to make us lose focus. If you're here this morning and you say, hey, listen, I lost focus. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just happened. That's part of being human. But that's why we have a God who knows what we need before we even know we need it. And so he gave us the ability to ask forgiveness and the atoning blood of Jesus to come wash over us again and make us right in his standing. You may say, listen, I've been chasing the gods of this world and I realize that I've never had a relationship with the only true and living God. And this morning you may want to make that public declaration of your faith in Jesus and be baptized this morning. Adam has chosen a song for us. We're going to sing right now, and if we can assist you in any way, won't you come as we stand and sing the song?